Guilty, 30 days in county jail. The judge's voice boomed, his gavel striking the bench with a finality that echoed through the courtroom. The man before him stood motionless, too broken to protest. Judge Harold Grayson thought he was enforcing the law in his small Tennessee courtroom until a group of Marines arrived. And everything changed. Who was this man? What brought the Marines there? What's the most surprising act of justice you've ever witnessed? Let's find out. Welcome to True Quiet Stories. Let's uncover what happened in this story. If you love these stories, you can support the channel by liking and subscribing. In a small Tennessee town, the air carried the scent of oak and justice. Judge Harold Grayson presided there. He was 58 years old, a district judge at the Bradley County Courthouse, a modest brick building on Main Street where the hum of ceiling fans mingled with the rustle of legal papers. Harold's days were a steady rhythm of hearings and rulings, his hand steady as he flipped through case files, his decisions delivered with a precision honed over decades on the bench. He wore his graying hair neatly combed, his black robe crisp despite the summer heat, his wire-rimmed glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, giving him a stern air that commanded respect. He lived in a quaint house on Pine Road, a two-story home with a wraparound porch, a study lined with law books, and a backyard where hummingbirds flitted around a feeder his late wife had loved. Harold had grown up in Cleveland, Tennessee, a town of just over 4,000 people, where the local textile mill had shuttered years ago, leaving behind a community that relied on its small businesses and tight-knit bonds to survive Harold's life. In Cleveland was a disciplined march through duty. The courthouse had been a fixture for over a century, its oak-paneled walls bearing the weight of countless verdicts, its stained-glass windows casting colorful patterns on the floor during morning sessions. Harold had started as a clerk there in his 20s, working under a mentor who'd taught him the importance of fairness, a lesson he carried into his judgeship when he took the bench at 40. He'd earned a reputation for being strict but just, his rulings often favoring the letter of the law over the nuances of circumstance, a trait that had earned him both admiration and quiet criticism from the town's residents. Outside the courtroom, Harold was a man of routine, starting his mornings with black coffee and the local paper, tending to his late wife's rose garden in the evenings, and attending the town's annual harvest festival, where he'd judge the pie contest with a meticulous eye. His wife, Margaret, had passed away 5 years ago after a battle with cancer, a loss that had left him quieter, more reserved, his evenings now spent with a glass of bourbon and the soft crackle of a record player spinning her favorite jazz tunes. Harold had learned the value of order early on. His father had been a school principal, a man who ran his household with the same firmness he brought to his classrooms, his lessons on discipline shaping Harold's view of the world. His mother, a librarian, had filled their home with books, her gentle encouragement fostering Harold's love for knowledge, though her passing when he was a teenager had left a void that discipline alone couldn't fill. After high school, Harold had attended a local college, studying law with a focus that impressed his professors, his determination carrying him through late nights at the library and part-time jobs at a hardware store to pay tuition. He'd married Margaret at 27, her laughter a bright spot in his structured life. And together they'd built a quiet existence in Cleveland, their weekends filled with hikes in the nearby Smoky Mountains and dinners at the town's only Italian restaurant, where they'd share a plate of spaghetti under string lights. Margaret's death had shifted something in Harold, his once warm demeanor cooling into a stricter resolve, his focus on the law, a way to anchor himself in a world that felt less certain without her. The Bradley County Courthouse was Harold's domain, a place where he felt in control, where the rules were clear, and justice was his to deliver. On busy days, the courtroom buzzed with activity, lawyers shuffling papers, clerks calling cases, spectators whispering in the back rows, their voices a low hum against the creak of the wooden benches. Harold presided over it all with an unwavering hand, his rulings a reflection of the principles he'd held since his youth, principles that had guided him through personal loss and professional challenges alike. He'd seen his share of cases over the years, from petty thefts to property disputes, each one a puzzle to be solved with the law as his guide. The townsfolk respected him, even if they sometimes grumbled about his rigidity, often sharing stories at the local diner about Judge Grayson's iron gavel. But Harold didn't mind the whispers. He believed in the system, in the clarity it brought to a messy world, and he carried that belief into every decision, even the ones that weighed heavier on his conscience than he'd admit. The Bradley County Courthouse was a solemn stage that overcast October morning, its oak-paneled walls absorbing the echo of Judge Harold Grayson's gavel as his verdict landed like a stone in still water. The courtroom buzzed with a quiet tension, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and the faint rustle of papers, as clerks prepared for the next case. Harold sat high on his bench, his wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the light from the stained glass windows, his black robe a stark contrast to the muted tones of the room. He adjusted a stack of files with deliberate precision, his stern gaze fixed on the man before him, a man whose slumped shoulders and downcast eyes spoke of a weight far heavier than the crime he'd been charged with. The gallery held a handful of spectators, locals who'd come for other hearings, a journalist from the Cleveland Chronicle scribbling notes, and a few retirees who frequented the courthouse for lack of better entertainment. Their whispers filled the space like a low hum, a mix of curiosity and indifference as they watched the scene unfold. The man in the defendant's chair was Thomas Ellis, a name Harold had barely glanced at in the case file, a man whose story he hadn't paused to consider beyond the charge of petty theft. Thomas was 67 years old, a homeless veteran who'd been surviving on the streets of Cleveland for years, his gaunt frame wrapped in a threadbare jacket that hung loosely on his shoulders. He'd served as a lance corporal in the U.S. Marine Corps during the Iraq War, stationed in Baghdad in 2004, where he'd led his squad through a deadly ambush in Sadr City, dragging a wounded comrade to safety under heavy fire, an act that earned him a Bronze Star he'd never claimed. The war had left its mark, scars on his hands from shrapnel, a limp from a poorly healed leg injury, and a mind haunted by the faces of those he couldn't save. He'd returned to Cleveland in 2006, a shadow of the man he'd been, his marriage. Crumbling under the strain of his PTSD, his daughter Emily, now a distant memory after she moved to Nashville with her mother, unable to handle his descent into silence. Thomas had lost his job at a local warehouse soon after, his savings dwindling as he drifted from shelter to shelter, eventually finding himself on the streets, his only possessions a tattered backpack and a small tin box containing a photo of his family taken on Emily's 5th birthday, their smiles a painful reminder of a life he'd once known. Thomas had been arrested for stealing a jacket and a pair of socks from a small thrift store on the edge of town, a desperate act to survive. The approaching winter, his fingers numb from the early frost, his breath visible in the chilly air, as he'd slipped the items into his bag. He'd been caught by the store clerk, a young woman who'd called the police with a mix of pity and frustration, her voice trembling as she explained the theft to the officer who arrived. Thomas hadn't resisted, his shoulders slumping as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, his eyes fixed on the ground as he was led away, the weight of his circumstances heavier than the stolen goods. Now in the courtroom he stood before Harold, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, his voice barely audible as he entered a guilty plea, knowing he had no defense, no money for a fine, no hope of avoiding the sentence that loomed like a storm cloud. Harold's ruling came swiftly, his tone cold as he sentenced Thomas to 30 days in county jail, a decision that drew a sharp intake of breath from the journalist in the gallery, her pen pausing as she noted the severity of the punishment. For such a small crime, Thomas didn't react, his expression blank as the bailiff stepped forward to escort him out. his limp more pronounced as he shuffled toward the side door, the faded fabric of his stolen jacket catching the light as he moved. The spectators shifted in their seats, some shaking their heads, others murmuring about the harshness of the verdict, the retirees exchanging glances as they debated the fairness of it all. Harold removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose as he prepared to call the next case, his mind already moving on, the weight of his decision, a fleeting thought in a day filled with rulings. But not everyone in the courtroom was ready to move on. Near the back, a woman in a tailored blazer sat with a notepad in her lap, her sharp eyes following Thomas as he exited, her fingers tightening around her pen as a flicker of recognition crossed her face. Her name was Laura Bennett, a 52-year-old public defender who'd taken on a different case that morning, her presence in the gallery a matter of chance, or perhaps fate. Laura had served as a Marine herself, a captain who'd deployed to Iraq in 2004 alongside men like Thomas, her own. Bronze Star earned in a firefight not far from Sadr City, a memory that still woke her in the dead of night. She'd noticed the way Thomas carried himself, the subtle hunch of his shoulders, the dog tag that peeked out from beneath his collar as he turned toward the door, its glint catching the light from the stained glass window. Her pulse quickened as she leaned forward, her mind racing through memories of names and faces from her service, a name surfacing like a whisper, Thomas Ellis, a lance corporal who'd saved a man's life under fire, a man she'd heard about. In hushed tones during her deployment, she scribbled a note on her pad, her handwriting hurried as she jotted down the details of the case, her resolve hardening with every word. Laura stood, slipping her notepad into her bag as she made her way to the exit, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor, her thoughts already on the call she'd make as soon as she reached the hallway. A call that would set in motion a chain of events no one in the courtroom could have predicted. The Bradley County Courthouse stood still under the gray October sky, its oak-paneled walls holding the weight of a sentence delivered without mercy. Thomas Ellis stood at the defendant's table, his frail body rigid as the bailiff moved to escort him from the courtroom, the echo of Judge Harold Grayson's gavel still lingering in the air like a thunderclap. Harold sat on his bench, his wire-rimmed glasses resting on a stack of files, his stern features set in a mask of resolve as he prepared to call the next case, his mind already shifting to the docket's demands. The spectators in the gallery shifted uncomfortably, their murmurs a low hum, locals waiting for other hearings, the journalist from the Cleveland Chronicle jotting notes with a furrowed brow, and a few retirees exchanging uneasy glances at the harshness of the verdict. The stained glass windows cast muted colors across the wooden floor, a faint glow that did little to warm the chill that had settled over the room, a chill born of a ruling that felt too heavy for the crime of stealing a jacket and socks. Thomas took a shaky step toward the side door, his limp more pronounced under the weight of his threadbare jacket, his hands trembling as he clutched the edge of the table for support one last time, his gaze fixed on the floor as if it could shield him from the reality of 30 days in a cell. The bailiff, a middle-aged man with a stern jaw, placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder, guiding him forward with a gentleness that belied his official role, his own discomfort evident in the way he avoided Thomas's eyes. The spectators watched, in silence, some shaking their heads, others whispering about the judge's reputation for strictness, their voices a quiet chorus of disapproval that Harold barely registered. He adjusted his robe, his movements methodical, the weight of his decision a fleeting thought in a day filled with rulings, his focus already on the next file, the next case, the next chance to uphold the law he'd sworn to serve. But the courtroom's rhythm was about to break. The heavy double doors at the back swung open with a creak, and a wave of murmurs rippled through the gallery as a group of U.S. Marines in dress uniforms stepped inside, their polished boots striking the floor with a steady cadence that commanded attention. Harold's head snapped up, his glasses slipping down his nose as he took in the sight. 6 Marines, their medals gleaming under the courtroom lights, their faces set with a quiet intensity that sent a jolt through the room. The spectators turned in their seats, their whispers turning to gasps, the journalist's pen freezing mid-sentence as she craned her neck to see the retirees leaning forward with wide-eyed curiosity. The lead Marine, a tall man with a commanding presence, strode down the aisle, his uniform crisp, his gaze locked on Harold. As he approached the bench, a folder tucked under his arm. Harold removed his glasses entirely, his voice sharp as he addressed the interruption. "What's the meaning of this?" "This courtroom is in session," he said, his tone a mix of authority and confusion. The Marine stopped at the front, saluting briefly before speaking, his voice clear and resonant. "Your Honor, we're here on behalf of Lance Corporal Thomas." "Ellis," he said, gesturing to Thomas, who had paused near the side door, his eyes lifting for the first time, a flicker of recognition crossing his weathered face as he saw the uniforms. The Marine turned to the gallery, his words carrying a weight that silenced every whisper. "Lance Corporal Ellis served in Iraq in 2004, risking his life to save a fellow Marine in Sadr City. He earned a Bronze Star for his bravery, a medal. He never claimed. We're here to ensure his service isn't forgotten." The courtroom erupted into gasps, the journalists scribbling furiously, the spectators exchanging stunned looks as the reality of Thomas's past sank in. Thomas's hands shook as he turned fully to face the Marines, his limp forgotten as he took a hesitant step back toward the center of the room, his dog tag glinting under the light as he moved. The lead Marine opened the folder, pulling out a small velvet box, his voice softening as he addressed Thomas directly. "This belongs to you," he said, opening the box to reveal a Bronze Star, its ribbon a vibrant contrast to the muted tones of the courtroom. Thomas's eyes filled with tears as he accepted the medal, his fingers brushing over the metal, a piece of his past restored in a way he'd never imagined. The spectators broke into applause, some standing to clap, others wiping tears from their eyes, their voices a chorus of admiration for a hero they'd overlooked for so long. Laura Bennett, the public defender who'd recognized Thomas, stepped forward from the gallery, her tailored blazer a stark contrast to the casual attire of the spectators, her notepad clutched in her hand as she addressed Harold. "Your Honor, in light of this, I request a reconsideration of the sentence," she said, her voice steady, but urgent. Harold leaned back in his chair, his stern facade cracking as he looked from Laura to Thomas, then to the Marines, the weight of his earlier ruling pressing down on him like a physical force. He cleared his throat, his tone softer as he spoke. "Sentence suspended," he said. His words met with a fresh wave of applause, the journalist capturing every moment as the retirees nodded in approval, their earlier doubts replaced by respect. The Marines saluted Thomas, their gesture a silent tribute to his sacrifice, a moment that transformed the courtroom into a place of honor. One of them handed Laura an envelope, her eyes lighting up as she opened it, revealing a fund to help Thomas get back on his feet. A new start for a man who'd given so much. The town of Cleveland would never forget that day, a day when justice bent toward compassion, a day that reminded them all of the heroes who walk among them, often unseen, often unheard, but never truly forgotten. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to True Quiet Stories. For more untold tales of valor, hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.